Long before Columbus, before the first European sails cut across the Atlantic, they were already here. Millions of people spread across forests, mountains, and plains, building cities older than the pyramids, watching the stars, shaping a world called Turtle Island. They lived by the rhythm of the earth, guided by spirits and bound by the law of 7 generations. But when the strangers came carrying steel, fire, and disease, the world they knew began to burn. From the sacred mounds of Cahokia to the tears on the trail, their story is not one of extinction, but of endurance. This is the untold history of the first Americans, the people who built a continent long before it had a name. Subscribe and stay with us, because what you're about to hear next is history the world tried to bury. Native peoples of North America. The native peoples of North America, also known as American Indians, Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, and First Americans, are the original inhabitants of North America, believed to have migrated into the region between 40,000 and 40,000 years ago, developing into separate nations with distinct and sophisticated cultures. These autonomous nations spread from Alaska, through Canada, and the lower United States. The earliest periods of migration, settlement, and development are defined by archaeological evidence, spearheads, tools, monumental structures from sites throughout North America, and are most often referred to by the following terms. Paleo-Indian Clovis culture, c. 40,000 to c. 14,000 BCE. Dalton Folsom culture, c. 8500–7900 BCE. Archaic period, c. 8001–000 BCE. Woodland period, c. 500 BCE to c. 1100 CE. Mississippian culture, c. 1100–1540 CE. During the Archaic period, some native populations moved from a hunter-gatherer paradigm to a more sedentary social model, as evidenced by sites such as Watson Break, c. 3500 BCE, Poverty Point, c. 1701–100 BCE, and others of varying size, developed throughout the region during the Woodland and Mississippian culture eras. The cultures that developed in and around these sites were distinct from one another, but shared a worldview that included belief in a higher power and disembodied spirits, the value of community over individual needs, reciprocity and interaction with the environment and each other, the importance of ritual and tradition, the practice of warfare and slavery, and conservation of resources. Women were highly respected in the communities and frequently served as leaders or advisors in government. These separate communities developed into what are sometimes called tribes, but more often referred to now as nations. At some point prior to c. 980 to c. 1030 CE, when the first European settlement was established in North America by Leif Erikson at Elance Aux Meadows, Newfoundland. By the time of the beginning of European colonization of the Americas in the 15th century CE, they were highly developed political and social entities associated with a specific region and a certain territory within that region. Although European expansion across Canada and the United States eventually deprived the indigenous peoples of their ancient lands, the nations still exist today, and the image of the vanished Indian is as much of a myth as the noble savage, or similar tropes developed by European and American scholars during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Regions and inhabitants. The first immigrants are believed to have arrived from Asia across the Bering Land Bridge, also known as Beringia, that connected modern-day Siberia with Alaska, and are thought to have arrived with dogs, which were already domesticated. At the same time or later, people are also believed to have arrived by sea, establishing themselves along the west coast and down through South America. Based on archaeological evidence, There seem to have been several migrations over many years, but why the people chose to relocate is unknown. From Beringia, the people moved into the region of modern-day Alaska, across Canada, and down through what is now the United States. By the time of the last glacial maximum, c. 26,000 BCE, migrants had established themselves as far south as modern New Mexico. As the Earth warmed and the glaciers melted, Beringia was submerged c. 10,000 BCE, ending further migration across a land route, though it is possible people still arrived by sea. All of the above is the generally accepted narrative of how North America came to be inhabited, but it should be noted these are only theories. No one actually knows how or when people first appeared on the continent, and each Native American nation has its own origin story. However it happened, and wherever they came from, North Americans had established themselves in different regions by the Archaic period, developing unique cultures and tribal identities, eventually numbering over 500, with a population in the millions. A precise number is challenged, and ranges between 6–70 million or more. Owing to considerations of space, only a few of these tribal entities are listed below by region and language family. Arctic Alaska, Esquimalt Aleut, Haida Input Inuit Tlingit among others. Canada, Inuit, Metis, and over 50 distinct nations numbering over 600 diverse communities. Northwest coast, roughly Alaska down to northern California, Athabascan, Chimequam, Chinookian, Haida, Salishan, and Tlingit, numbering over 60 distinct tribal entities. Northeastern woodlands, from the Great Lakes through the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, Algonquian, Algonquin, and Iroquois nations, numbering over 50 distinct socio-political entities. Southeastern woodlands, roughly the states of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Muskogean, Yuchi, Siouan, and Iroquoian nations, numbering around 50 different tribes. Plains and prairie, from the Mississippi Valley to the Rocky Mountains and south to the Rio Grande, roughly. Algonquian, Algonquin, Siouan, and Caddoan nations, numbering around 40 different tribes. Plateau, roughly the states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and parts of Lower Canada. Luduamian, Salishan, Shahapshan, and Wyalatpuan nations, numbering over 20 different tribes. Great Basin, roughly the states of Colorado, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and part of Idaho. The Udo-Aztecan nations including the Shoshone and Paiute, numbering around 10 tribes. California, Hokan, Penutian, Ritwan, Udo-Aztecan, Yukian, numbering around 30 tribes. Southwest, roughly the states of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and part of Upper Mexico. Athabascan, Pueblo, Tanoan, Udo-Aztecan, Yuman, and Zuni, numbering over 50 tribes. Community development and agriculture. These nations developed from the communities established during the Archaic, Woodland, and Mississippian eras, and by c. 1540 CE were sophisticated socio-political entities. Scholar Michael G. Johnson writes, "The complicated geographical diffusion of tribes with a common ancestral language base suggests continual movement, invasion, migration, and conquest long before the white man set foot on the continent. We know of substantial cultures that came and went long before European contact, such as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, which were partly based on Mesoamerican gardening. The Europeans did not, therefore, disturb a Garden of Eden, but rather a continent of tribal groups and cultures that were fully dynamic. These cultures were already developing by the Dalton-Folsom period, which provides evidence of a belief in an afterlife, a spirit world, and a priority placed on the community above the individual. The Dalton Folsom people developed technology for hunting and construction that included drills, hammers, scrapers, knives, and the atlatl, a stick with a cup at one end that held the butt of a spear, and fired it toward an object with greater momentum than if thrown by hand. During the Archaic period, c. 2100 BCE, maize corn was introduced from Mesoamerican peoples trading with those of the North American Southwest, encouraging the move away from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to agriculture and permanent settlements. Maize became the staple crop of the North Americans as its cultivation spread from the Southwest in every direction. Beans and squash, also introduced from Mesoamerica, were joined with maize as the three sisters of agriculture. The corn stalks provide a natural trellis for the beans to climb. The beans process nitrogen for the roots of all three, and the squash leaves shade the ground, preventing weeds and regulating moisture. Nutritionally, the three crops also complement each other, providing a well-balanced diet. Even after the cultivation of the three sisters became widespread, the hunter-gatherer culture continued with these crops serving as a supplement. Some nations, like those of the Great Plains, continued as hunter-gatherers longer than others. The peoples of the southeastern woodlands began erecting monumental sites c. 5400 BCE and developed the technology that produced major population centers such as Watson Brake, Poverty Point, Etowah Mounds, Serpent Mound, Pinson Mounds, Moundville, and Cahokia, once the largest urban center on the North American continent. These centers, except for those like Pinson Mounds or Serpent Mound, understood as religious astronomical sites, engaged in local and long-distance trade with each other, establishing well-worn routes between the cities, acceptable forms of barter, and production distribution methods. Society, spirituality, and warfare. As noted, each of these nations were distinct cultural entities, and so any discussion of them as a group falls into generalities. Overall, Native American culture was informed by the spiritual beliefs of the people, which held that all things were imbued with the same life force and deserved one's respect. Scholar Jack D. Forbes comments, European writers long ago referred to indigenous Americans' ways as animism, a term that means lifeism. And it is true that most or perhaps all Native Americans see the entire universe as being alive. That is, as having movement and an ability to act. But more than that, Indigenous Americans tend to see this living world as a fantastic and beautiful creation, engendering extremely powerful feelings of gratitude and indebtedness, obliging us to behave as if we are related to one another. An overriding characteristic of Native North American religion is that of gratitude, a feeling of overwhelming love and thankfulness for the gifts of the Creator and the Earth universe. Each separate nation understood itself as part of every other, but this did not mean they always lived in peace or respected each other's territory. Wars were fought over water rights, to prevent outsiders from hunting in one's territory for tribal prestige and power, and for captives who could be ransomed or held as slaves. Common weapons were the bow and arrow, first developed during the woodland period, spears, knives, and tomahawks. Some warriors also carried shields made of animal hide and wore breastplate armor of hide and animal bone. Scalps were taken from enemies killed in battle as trophies and encouraged personal prestige, respect, and social standing. Contrary to the view later perpetuated by European and American writers, Native American nations mounted formal pitched battles, engaged in the exchange of prisoners of war, and entered into peace treaties with each other. One's individual tribe was considered the most important, and, as Johnson observes, many tribal names translate simply as the real people or original people. In establishing their primacy, though, As Johnson also notes, many of the tribal names known today are not the same as those the indigenous Americans knew in the past. 8. One was responsible for honoring the beliefs of one's tribe and respecting the land of one's people, but was not obligated to extend that same courtesy toward outsiders unless a formal agreement had been reached joining nations in a mutually beneficial pact. One of the reasons Native Americans first engaged in contact with European arrivals was for the advantage guns and horses gave them over their neighbors. Wars were fought, and lands and captives were taken out of a perceived necessity to sustain one's people, but there was no concept of land ownership comparable to the European model. The earth and its resources did not belong to anyone specifically, but were a gift of the Great Spirit to everyone collectively, and one was expected to give back through rituals of reciprocity that maintained the life cycle. Scholar Larry J. Zimmerman describes one such ritual observed for ensuring robust harvests. At the core of long-established Native American beliefs is one that the rhythms of the universe are like those of a steady drumbeat. In order to be renewed, the rhythms and cycles of nature require human participation in the form of rituals that mark important points in the cosmic cycle. Such earth renewal rituals are usually based upon the seasons, or crucial times in the food supply calendar. These first food ceremonies are profoundly important, celebrating fertility and marking the renewal of a subsistence cycle, which incorporates everything from the appearance of the first salmon or buffalo to the growth of corn. Generally speaking, all indigenous American groups held to this same basic belief, although their forms of expression differed. Nations usually got along well with each other, engaged in trade, and allowed others to live peacefully except when conflicts arose. Government, daily life, and inventions. Women raised the children, built the homes, and cooked the food. Men hunted for food and protected the village from outside threats. Men and women both tended crops and played a role in government. Individual families were part of a clan, and that clan was part of a tribe nation. The leader of the nation was recognized as the chief, who made decisions after holding council meetings with the head figures of the clans that made up the tribe. Some nations banded together, like the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois Confederacy, or Iroquois League, consisting of 5 separate nations operating under a democratic government, which influenced the founding fathers of the United States in forming their own. The Powhatan Confederacy was made up of over 30 tribes, who paid tribute to the chief of the Powhatans and participated in common rituals but maintained significant autonomy. Homes differed by region and the needs of the people. The hunter-gatherers of the Great Plains favored portable homes, the teepee made of buffalo skin. The Inuit built igloos and large tents of animal hide. The Pueblos made their homes of sun-dried brick. The people of the northeastern woodlands lived in the longhouse made of bent saplings and woven reed mats. These homes, as noted, were usually built by women, but were maintained by both women and men. The day began at sunrise, sometimes with a ritual welcoming the dawn, and a meal prepared over open fires or ovens heated by hot stones from a fire. The typical diet consisted of vegetables, fish, meat, berries, and nuts. Hunting parties were almost always male, although women participated by building the seasonal sites and cleaning the game as it was brought in. Women also made clothing from animal hides and fur, sometimes decorated with the feathers of birds, each of which held some symbolic significance. Girls were brought up by their mothers and aunts, learning the skills of maintaining the home and community, and boys were raised by their fathers and uncles to hunt, fish, fight, and protect the village or city. Girls usually married between the ages of 13-15 and boys between 15-20. These unions were usually arranged by the parents, though not always, and the bride commonly took up residence with her husband's family. Music and storytelling, often combined, were the most common form of entertainment, but also served religious and medical purposes. Stories chanted to the beat of drums were believed to drive evil spirits out of a sick person or encourage harvests or bring rain. These rituals also included dance or the reenactment of an ancient story. The shaman of the tribe, often referenced as the medicine man or medicine woman, did not just rely on chanting or dancing to heal the sick, but was an expert in herbal remedies. Native Americans invented aspirin in the form of willow tree bark and its salicylic acid. They also developed anesthetics using peyote and coca or datura and the syringe. The Native Americans were responsible for the invention or development of many other items, games, and practices known today. They were the first to cultivate and use tobacco, sunflower, pumpkins, and peanuts, and invented the parka, kayak, and harpoon. Mathematics and astronomical observatories were also developed from the Archaic period onwards, as were urban planning, road systems, and open-air theaters and temples. Ball games and board games were popular forms of entertainment, and the development of technology like the atlatl improved accuracy in hunting. Chewing gum, processing maple syrup, the bunk bed, the canoe, field and ice hockey, lacrosse, sunglasses, moccasins, tug-of-war, and even the water gun were first conceived of by the indigenous peoples of North America, not to mention the many other inventions and innovations they borrowed from those to the south. Conclusion. When the Europeans began making first contact with the native North Americans in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, their impact was almost universally detrimental. European diseases, against which the natives had no natural defense, killed thousands, while the genocidal policies and wars of the 17th-19th centuries, as well as enslavement and deportation, decreased the population further, allowing for increased European claims to ancestral lands. In time, Native Americans came to be represented in the popular imagination wholly through a European lens, which purposefully misrepresented them, as noted by Johnson. The Indian has been portrayed historically as vain, cruel to captives, a brave fighters but with no taste for pitched battle, and susceptible to alcohol with resultant brawls, family disruption, and inertia. Alternately, the Indian has more recently been eulogized as enjoying perfect harmony with Mother Earth or nature, as having a perfectly democratic and egalitarian social organization, as being eminently spiritual and considerate of friend, stranger, young and old. In the past few years, the Indian has been portrayed as a model conservationist, taking only what he needed from the natural world. All these images, partial, unbalanced, or at best taken out of context, are highly misleading and should be taken with a decent amount of skepticism. Among the most dangerous of these images is that of the vanishing Indian, encouraging the myth that serves as the title of the work, All the Real Indians Died Off, and 20 other myths about Native Americans by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz and Dina Gilio Whittaker. As Johnson, among others, notes, there are probably more North American Indians or people of Indian descent alive today than in 1492. 8. The belief in the extinction of the indigenous peoples of North America is simply a convenient means of ignoring the unjust and failed policies of the United States government toward them. Recent activism, however, and especially the persistent recourse of Native American advocates to the U.S. legal system, shows promise of winning justice for indigenous peoples, setting the historical record straight, and clearly establishing how the original inhabitants of North America have not gone anywhere. 10 North American Native facts you need to know. The history and culture of the native peoples of North America are often overlooked, as they have been largely eclipsed by the history of the European settlers, who colonized the region beginning in the 17th century. The original inhabitants of the land have a long past, however, which deserves wider recognition and respect. According to modern-day non-native scholars, those now known as Indigenous Americans migrated into North America between 40,000 and 40,000 years ago. But in the belief systems of the people themselves, they came from the land known to many native nations as Turtle Island and have always been a part of it. Native American nations developed highly sophisticated and diverse cultures, which were maintained for thousands of years prior to the European colonization of the Americas, which significantly decreased the indigenous population through diseases and warfare, and deprived survivors of their ancestral lands through legislation, forced relocation, and treaties which were then not honored by the United States government. The doctrine of discovery held that any lands not claimed by a Christian sovereign were free for the taking by any other without regard for those who were already living in those regions. From the foundation of the Jamestown colony of Virginia in 1607 onwards, the spirit of this doctrine dictated how the colonizers would treat the indigenous peoples of North America, including the attempts at erasing their history, culture, and language, since they were regarded as uncivilized savages. Actually, Native American culture was as highly developed and far more inclusive than that of the European colonizers. Native American nations prior to colonization waged war, conquered lands, held slaves, depleted natural resources, and were no more the noble savage of 18th and 19th century American literature than their characterization as the savage brute. As Euro-Americans came to dominate North America, the settlers tended to demonize or idealize the indigenous people. But they were just people, with the same basic desires all people have, only expressing them differently than what was acceptable to the Europeans and later Euro-Americans, who quietly, and often not so quietly, tried to erase the indigenous cultures and the people themselves. The native peoples of North America survived, however, and still form vital communities observing traditional rites, telling ancient stories, and teaching their language and customs to their youth. The following 10 facts are only a small sampling of their vast culture, history, and contributions, but the books listed in the bibliography following the article will provide readers with many others. Watson Brake predates the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza is dated to 2589–566 BCE, the reign of the king Khufu, Cheops, of 4th dynasty Egypt, but the site now known as Watson Brake in modern-day Louisiana dates to c. 3500 BCE. Consisting of 11 mounds, the original purpose of the site continues to challenge archaeologists and historians, as it does not seem to have been constructed as a residential, commercial, or religious center. Ceramics and tools found at Watson Brake attest to human activity dating to at least c. 3500 BCE, but it is unclear what the people were doing there. The site was discovered only as recently as the 1980s, however, and so archaeologists seem confident that further excavations will bring the purpose of the place into clearer focus. Watson Brake is only one of many ancient Native American sites throughout the USA, including Cactus Hill, Poverty Point, Serpent Mound, Etowah Mounds, Moundville, and Cahokia, among others, but so far it is the oldest mound complex discovered to date. Cahokia was the largest city in North America. Cahokia, in modern-day Illinois, dates to c. 600 to c. 1350 CE and was once the largest urban center in North America. The city was a major religious site and trade hub, flourishing through routes running in every direction. The site covers 2,200 acres, 890 ha, and once included residences, a large commercial district, ball courts and playing fields. The popular Native American game of chunky, T-chunky, is thought to have originated here c. 600 CE, agricultural areas, and ceremonial religious spaces. The original name for the city is unknown, and the modern designation comes from the Cahokia tribe who lived nearby in the 19th century. The original occupants of the city were initially thought to have mysteriously vanished, and some articles and videos still advance this claim. But archaeologists now believe the site was abandoned at some point c. 1350 CE due to natural disasters, notably earthquakes and floods and overpopulation. The site was repopulated by the 1500s by the people of the Illinois Confederacy, who were still there in the 1800s, but had no knowledge of who had built the city that is a UNESCO World Heritage Site today. Pre-colonial North Americans spoke over 300 languages. Prior to European colonization, there were over 300 languages spoken by the North American natives, and according to some estimates, possibly as many as 500. Each nation spoke its own language and communicated with others either through interpreters or sign language. As part of the U.S. government's policy of assimilation, Native American languages were discouraged, and beginning in the early 19th century, children were taken from their parents and moved to boarding schools where they learned English and were taught to embrace European culture, religion, and values. Native Americans were not allowed to speak or teach their own languages until the 1970s, and by that time, many had been lost. Today, there are only approximately 170 Native American languages spoken in the USA. Native American initiatives to revive their ancestral languages are ongoing, however, encouraging a reconnection with the traditions of the past. Native Americans first cultivated important crops. Some of the most important crops worldwide today were first cultivated by the North American natives. Corn was introduced from South and Central America at some point during the Archaic period, c. 2100 BCE, and came to be a staple crop across North America, along with beans and squash. All three were grown together through the practice known as the Three Sisters of Agriculture, still practiced today. In Three Sisters companion planting, the corn is planted first, the beans second, which wrap around the corn stalk, and then the squash, whose leaves shade the roots of the beans and corn. Along with these, Native Americans also grew and continue to cultivate gourds, potatoes, sunflowers, tobacco, tomatoes, plums, and many other crops. 7 Generations Principle. The 7th generation principle, also known as 7 generation sustainability and 7 generations planning, is believed to have originated with the Iroquois nation and maintains that every decision made by a people should consider the effects it will have on their descendants 7 generations into the future. This policy is in keeping with the cultural value of Native American nations generally, that the good of the community as a whole is more important than the needs of the individual or the minority, and that people are stewards, rather than owners, of the land, and so the needs of the earth should always be considered. As the earth is understood as a living being, it is regarded as a member of the community, and by extension, so are all the animals and the plant life the earth supports. By considering the effects of their actions on the 7th generation, the people are not only thinking of their descendants, but of the continued well-being and sustainability of the entire community. USA Constitution, modeled on Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The 7 generations principle is said to have guided the decisions made by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of the 5 nations of the Iroquois, Cayuga, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, and Seneca, later known as the 6 nations after the inclusion of the Tuscarora. The Grand Council of the 6 Nations was a democracy in which women had an equal voice, and the Great Law of Peace was understood to include everyone. The structure of the government of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was set down in a constitution that mandated the separation of powers into different branches and responsibilities, and declared the authority of the government came from the governed. The founding fathers of the United States drew on this model to create their own form of government. Women as equals. The concept of the good of the community prevailing over that of the individual or minority extended to women, not only among the Iroquois, but also throughout North American nations generally. Women were responsible for trade, construction, and maintenance of the home, could divorce their husbands and retain the home and possessions, and had an equal voice in government. The Iroquois, however, directly influenced the women's suffrage movement of the 19th century in the USA, as early activists including Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage cited the Iroquois women as enjoying greater liberties than white women. Still, once women were given the right to vote through the 19th Amendment in 1920, many spoke out against that same right being extended to Native Americans, who were prohibited from voting until 1924 with the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act. And even then, some states continued to disenfranchise Native Americans until the 1950s. Vast body of literature. North American nations produced a significant body of literature, initially passed down orally generation to generation, before stories, poems, songs, and longer works comparable to the novel were committed to writing. Every nation had its own stories which kept the past alive while also transmitting important cultural values. Works were eventually written down by white settlers interested in native culture, such as anthropologist George Bird Grinnell, and by Native American authors themselves including Charles Eastman, John Rowland Ridge, Lynn Riggs, Zit Khalasa, N. Scott Momaday, Louise Erdrich, and Sherman Alexie, among many others. Storytelling has always been and continues to be a vital aspect of Native American culture, and their literature includes epic adventures, ghost stories, love stories, origin myths, and many other genres. Turtle Island. Many Native American origin myths relate how the world, or North America, was formed on the back of a turtle, and so some nations, including the Iroquois, refer to the continent as Turtle Island, a term also used for the earth as a whole by other nations. In the Iroquois creation myth, there was an upper and lower world, and the lower was entirely water. The daughter of the great ruler of the upper world, close to delivering her child, lay down on a cloud which began to sink toward the lower world. The creatures of the lower world scrambled to find something she could safely land upon, and the turtle agreed to have mud from the bottom of the endless sea heaped upon his back. As the muskrat dove deep and brought up earth to smooth across the turtle's shell, the birds guided the cloud and sleeping goddess toward it. The turtle then became known as Earth Bearer, and the land as Turtle Island. Indian Removal Act of 1830. North American natives began losing their land on Turtle Island when Europeans arrived in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, claiming territory as their own, according to their understanding of the doctrine of discovery. In the region now known as New England, Native Americans were steadily deprived of their ancestral lands beginning in 1620, and as more Europeans arrived, more land was lost. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized agents of the U.S. government to remove Native Americans from their homelands east of the Mississippi to regions out west designated as Indian Territory, primarily the modern state of Oklahoma. This policy resulted in the deaths of many Native Americans, especially in 1830, 81839 among the Cherokee Nation, who referred to their relocation as the Trail of Tears. The Indian Removal Act under President Andrew Jackson has since been condemned, and the 2007 Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples recognized that Native Americans are entitled to their land, but so far, few efforts have succeeded in returning very much of it. The Land Back movement presently works toward this goal. Conclusion: the Land Back movement is not seeking to deprive modern-day Americans of their lands and homes, but only the return of ancestral lands and recognition of Native American legal rights to those lands. In this same way, Native American organizations such as Native Hope and First Nations Development Institute, as well as tribal societies and associations, seek to elevate awareness of Native American culture, history, and traditions. There are many fascinating aspects of Native American culture, and the various nations differed significantly in many respects. The story of the origin of the world, for example, is quite different among the people of the Plains Indians culture, such as the Sioux and Pawnee, than the Iroquois version given above. And among the Iroquois, as with other nations, there are many different versions of the same story. Native American Heritage Month, observed in the USA every year in November, celebrates this diversity and the heritage of the over 575 native nations currently in the USA, encouraging natives and non-natives to engage with and appreciate the culture of the people who first built their homes and raised the cities across Turtle Island.